A former employee of a successful financial company, Nokoshi now hides from the past and present in an old car parked on the outskirts of town. Amnesia has robbed him not only of his memories, but also of his raison d'etre. When the insistent tapping on the glass brought him out of his half-slumber, Nokoshi raised his head. A young man was staring at him with cold certainty in his eyes. That night, he had no idea that the offer voiced by the stranger would be the beginning of something bigger than he could have imagined. But this time he refused the offer, deeming it abnormal. At dawn, fate struck again. His car, his only shelter, was taken away by a tow truck. The things that held the memories of his former life were gone. In that moment, he felt utterly shattered. When the stranger reappeared, Nokoshi had no choice but to agree to his strange proposal. Ito brought him to his apartment. Ito declares that he needs to have his skull drilled for the experiment. He assures him that it is safe. Nokoshi agrees, as he believes he has nothing to lose. Nokoshi lay motionless, clutching the remnants of his courage in his hands as the drill begins its work, revealing the secrets of his mind. In the morning, he awoke as usual. The familiar routine quickly brought him back to the hustle and bustle of the city. In the evening, when a gust of wind hit his face, he reflexively closed his right eye. What he saw through the left one changed him forever. The people rushing through the streets began to lose their human appearance. Their bodies became curved, grotesque. Some turned into massive creatures covered in scales, others became transparent like glass, others became faceless shadows. Trying to cope with the horror, he didn't notice that he was on the outskirts of the city, where his path was blocked by a creature, a huge robot with human features. It was a Yakuza boss surrounded by minions. One of the henchmen roughly grabbed Asuma, pinning him against the wall. But the moment fear peaked, Nokoshi was hit by a wave of strange realization. It was as if an invisible force touched him, and he felt a connection to whatever was inside the creature across from him. The boss's hand holding the knife suddenly trembled. He lowered the weapon, his massive body staggered and then fell to the ground. The mechanical giant, who was still radiating power a moment ago, looked frail. His subordinates scattered in panic. On the third day, Nokoshi managed to retrieve the machine. Sitting in his car, he realized that he had transformed into something else. His vision was now revealing to him the hidden truth of the world. People who seemed ordinary were far from what they claimed to be. The world around him had lost its familiar shell, revealing chaos and secrets. This new gift, or curse, began to consume his thoughts. On the third day, Nokoshi managed to retrieve the machine. Ito's obsession with the experiment now seemed boundless. Ito called the creatures Nokoshi had seen homunculi, the spawn of the human subconscious, disfigured by stress and trauma. Eager to confirm his theory, Ito took Nokoshi to a brothel, a place where broken souls sought solace or hid their wounds. There, a woman who stood out from the crowd caught their attention. Ito could not take his eyes off her. Something about her awakened an inexplicable longing in him. He followed her into the cafe and approached the woman, but as soon as he made contact with her, Nokoshi saw something incredible. The sand that was her essence began to be drawn into Ito's invisible body. It was as if he was absorbing her fears, her essence, her pain. When the woman left, Ito was left standing like an empty vessel. Red dots appeared on his body, strange marks that looked like burns. Nokoshi realized that the process of communicating with Ito's homunculus had touched the depths of his own soul. Scrolling through her social media account, Nokoshi found evidence of her internal struggle. There were pictures of cuts on her body and texts filled with sexual fantasies and rebellion against her strict parents. At that moment, several people surrounded him. They were subordinates of a Yakuza boss who led him to their ringleader. But instead of threats and anger, Nokoshi once again experienced a vision, reaching into the most secret corners of this creature's soul. He saw how, once as a child, the boss had accidentally injured him while playing with a friend. It turns out that as a child, he had accidentally cut off his friend's pinky finger. The boss ran away without apologizing. This memory, soaked with shame and guilt, was eating him up from the inside out. Now it had taken physical form in the form of a giant robot that suddenly began to disintegrate, exposing the little crying boy. The robot shrank, becoming a toy, and it was as if the boss had been freed from an age-old burden. When the boss finally stood up, he cast aside the past, leaving the Yakuza world behind. Late that afternoon, Nokoshi heard a knock on his car door. It was the same woman. She began to taunt him. When Nokoshi looked at her with his left eye, her image was once again shaky, as if woven from sand. But this time he saw not just sand, but millions of tiny symbols, texts, codes for her life, her pain. The woman was deeply traumatized. As he pressed her against the car seat, he felt the sand begin to disappear. In its place appeared cuts, evidence of her inner struggle. Nokoshi realized that destroying the homunculus was not destruction, but the uncovering of the truth. Each movement revealed more and more scars. In his hands, the girl whose essence had turned to sand not so long ago was slowly taking on a human form. Her skin became smooth again and her eyes brightened. The next morning, Nokoshi noticed something strange. His own body had changed. His right arm had become mechanical, and his left leg had turned into quicksand. In a panic, he rushed to the hospital where Ito was being held. The hospital corridor was crowded, but everything around him seemed strangely distant to Nokoshi. Suddenly he noticed a woman without a face. He knew him, but couldn't remember where he was from. Ito's appearance interrupted his confused thoughts. Ito spoke of another victim of the experiment, the woman who had absorbed the homunculus. Her consciousness had failed, and she had committed suicide. Nokoshi was horrified. He didn't want to die seeing the monsters that now inhabited his world. He demanded that Ito close the hole in his head. Memories of the woman from the hospital kept him awake. Rummaging through old things in his car, he found an item that reminded him of him. It was his lover, whose face he couldn't forget. He immediately went to the hospital and found her. She was looking at him with a cold emptiness in her eyes. She had no memory of him. To help her recover her memory, he took her to their old apartment where every object, every sound was filled with memories. Slowly the past returned, but with it came back the wounds. As night enveloped the city, Nokoshi and Nanako finally felt comforted in each other's arms. Time seemed to stop, and the past, present, and future merged into one. At dawn, Nokoshi discovered a small wound on Nanako's forehead. It was the same as his, a sign of trepanation. He realized that Ito had involved her in the same experiment. Running into Ito's office, he found the room empty. He was brought out of his daze by the ringing of the phone. It was Ito. During the conversation, he confessed that he knew everything about Nokoshi and Nanako from the beginning. All the homunculi Nokoshi had seen were just reflections of his own world. Determined to save Nanako, Nokoshi returned to Ito's office and performed the trepanation again. His powers returned to him, but his body was deformed along with them. His robotic arm and sand leg became even more pronounced. When he returned to his apartment, he was horrified to find an unfamiliar woman wearing Nanako's clothes. Her face alternately changed from Nanako's appearance to a foreign, frightening countenance. Nokoshi, gripped by fear, demanded an explanation. The woman confessed that she had killed the real Nanako. When he touched her shoulder, he was pulled into a new vision. Chichiro and her boyfriend were rushing down the night highway, heated from an argument. The words grew sharper and sharper until she tried to open the door at a run to get out of the car. The guy stopped her with a sharp motion of his hand, but not before he noticed the woman in the road. It all happened in an instant. The car hit Nanako, followed by Nokoshi. Chichiro jumped out of the car in horror and saw her boyfriend lying lifelessly behind the wheel. Her gaze stopped on Nanako's body, which lay motionless on the cold pavement. For Nokoshi, this wasn't just a car accident. It was a night that erased his past. Memories came over him like a wave, the fight with Nanako, her tears, her confession of a miscarriage. She ran outside, unable to bear the pain, and he ran after her. But it was too late. On the side of the road, Chichiro, shivering and crying, confessed her real name to Nokoshi. She had no strength left to fight the past. She fainted, and he put her to bed. In the living room, Nokoshi ran into Ito. Their conversation was cold. Nokoshi felt that his life had no meaning. The love of his life was dead and monsters no longer scared him. Ito tried to get the upper hand as always, but Nokoshi finally revealed the truth. His homunculus was water. Memories of the water figure began to reveal something more. When Nokoshi saw the bubbles inside Ito, he realized, it was the image of his father. Nokoshi touched Ito, and his trauma appeared before him. A memory, a young boy ignored by his father, who gave all his attention to a goldfish. One day, seized by anger, the child broke the fish tank. The adult Ito begged Nokoshi to help him. But Nokoshi replied that he just needed to create his own world. On the seventh day, Ito made a decision. He made a hole in his forehead just like Nokoshi's and sewed his eyes shut. Nokoshi, meanwhile, has started a new life with Chichiro. He no longer wants to live in the past. That's the end of the movie. If you want to see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe and like the channel. See you soon.